Hello. This week, as you can tell from the PowerPoints, we're talking about South America. And you may notice on a couple of these, and probably from here on out, these are PowerPoints I've sort of put together myself over the years of teaching this course. So chapter 2, which I really don't lecture all that much over the years, as the PowerPoints provided by the publisher. If you look at mine, there's lots of links and videos, so there's kind of some Easter eggs, I guess you could say, throughout. I noticed they don't really come up on the viewer all that much, so if you download them, there's, like last week, there's a pretty cool video of a time lapse of what it's like to go through the Panama Canal on a ship. It kind of shows you the lock system of the canal. There's links to all sorts of news items. In this one, there's a link to a map site where I got the map for the Amazon River Basin. It's from Harvard University. If you're a map nerd, you're welcome. If you're not, you're still welcome. You can look at so those things are just there for your benefit, your amusement, your edification, whatever. If you want to use them, look at them. They're there for you. If not gonna hurt my feelings. In this packet of chapter 4, there's some video related to going around the Drake Passage south of Tierra del Fuego, which is the longest unbroken string of ocean or currents at 60 degrees latitude above the Antarctica, the Antarctic Circle. And the swell is enormous. So there's a video of a giant Russian ship, container ship, being tossed about by the waves. Anyway, things like that. So lots of links and things throughout the PowerPoints if you're of a mind to go deeper or just sort of go down some rabbit holes and see what's there. And also just lots of pictures, obviously given from a variety of places, showing just various and sundry geographical landmarks and things like that. There's also a video there in slide 13 of the Perito Moreno glacier bridge collapsing. Who doesn't like to see a glacier bridge collapse? So anyway, so a little briefly then on some of the political geographic concepts. So the colonial history of South America is similar to that in Central America. You've got a huge Spanish and more Portuguese influence, obviously, in Brazil. The reason Brazil is Portuguese and the rest of Central America or South America turned out to be Spanish is a deal they made with the Catholic Church back in the 1500s. It sort of drew a line. Brazil went to Portugal, the rest went to Spain. We know all the sorry history from there. We'll talk about the Portuguese and a little more when we get to sub-Saharan Africa and their version of colonialism. And as the same thing, it's kind of left a legacy, bad, good, and indifferent, I guess, throughout, obviously, linguistically. South America is much more Eurocentric than a lot of Central America. There's sort of a stereotype of Germans in Argentina and Paraguay that stems from a history that's there. The philosopher Nietzsche's, after he died in 1900, I think, his sister, a virulent anti-Semite, moved to Paraguay in a German enclave that was already there well before escaping Nazis and fascists in Italy and Germany were escaping to Argentina, after World War II and all those kinds of things. There's a huge Eurocentric population in Chile and Uruguay as well. So anyway, so so some of the reasons, some of the challenges, and this is the difference. Why is North America, United States, more prosperous than South America generally? And a couple things I think tend to lead to that. One is, there are things like our Constitution, I guess, and all that sort of thing, but also, if you just think about the benefit of Canada and the United States sort of dominating, again, just over and above all the history that we know about, how all that might have come about, but just the benefit of dominating an entire continent yourself, right? There's no sharing of coastline, no internal squabbles. Don't get me wrong, obviously we have squabbles today and we've had the Civil War, but in terms of just, we don't have multiple countries in one land space fighting over resources, right? Same with Canada. That provides a lot of stability, even though it seems unstable. So the slide there, slide 19, talks about barriers to integration. And part of that is the geography. It is an empty or hollow continent, as the geographers call it. Just not hollow. There's lots of forest, lots of mountains. Just it's inhospitable in some ways. The Amazon River basin and the Amazon forest, though immensely beautiful and immensely valuable as an ecosystem, is very difficult to live in terms of, just access to resources and all that. The Andes Mountains, same thing. Super high mountains, 20,000 plus foot peaks. And yes, the Inca were able to thrive there in a certain way and actually survived in many ways. They're Spanish conquerors. But it's hard to have modern cities and modern infrastructure. It's still very difficult to fly over the Andes Mountains. They are so high, right? Even with modern avionics and all of that, it makes it difficult. There's a slide 21 shows you what was called an interoceanic highway. So even to build a highway, right? So I don't know what highway goes through Minnesota, but down here in California, we've got we call our highways So Interstate 40, the 40, starts in a place called Barstow, California, which is about an hour and a half north of me. I can go up there, I can take a right at Barstow on Interstate 40, and I can drive literally straight to North Carolina. There's no passports, there's no taxes, there's gas. I can stop and say hi to my mom in Texas on the way, and then I'm off to North Carolina, and I can take a left on Interstate 95 and head straight up to Massachusetts or Maine. No passports, no customs, no nothing, right? I mean, that's just a huge benefit. South America, it takes treaties to get that stuff done. It takes cost sharing. It takes cooperation amongst governments that don't often like each other or have different governing systems. One may be sort of left wing, one may be right wing, all sorts of things. That makes it difficult to sort of have a cohesive sort of South American presence, if you will. There is no South American country, of course, right? It's a continent with different countries with similar histories in some ways, but also very different histories in other ways. So the interoceanic highway slide there, slide 21 in the packet, shows you a map of the plan. It was built, but even though it was built, the traffic is very minimal, relatively speaking. Again, not like an interstate highway that you see here in the United States or in Mexico, for that matter, driving down Baja to Cabo, or I have students here who drive to Monterrey or Guadalajara to see family, and there's major highways that go from here to California straight into Mexico. Traffic is heavy, oftentimes busy. Just not the same thing for a variety of reasons, right? To drive trucks from one place to another, you've got to have regulations that are similar, and it just has caused some issues there. Other barriers to integration, of course, is that lack of infrastructure, and then the individual countries. So, for example, there is this thing about Argentina being sort of oriented out towards European countries, Italy, Germany, the huge import with Great Britain back in the early 20th century. British basically introduced soccer into Argentina, though now soccer is like their religion. You know what I mean? It's super important down there. So while you'd think they'd be focused on Chile and Paraguay and Uruguay and their neighbors, they're out there, right? They're focusing on European trade partners, and Brazil the same way. They're focused on Portugal. They're focused on the United States. They're focused on other countries. And it's taken time to sort of get leaders to sort of look inward towards each other in a more basis. The more they have done that, free trade agreements and things like that, benefits have usually followed. Going down the slides here, so if you see, the reason I have a Pixar picture up there is because in the movie Up, that image is based on Angel Falls, which has an indigenous name also, which escapes me now that I need it. So that's why that's there. The Catatumbo lightning is an amazing sort of natural phenomenon in Venezuela, where it's like the most lightning strikes per minute, I think, anywhere in the world, because of sort of some strange environment there at the Lake Catatumbo in Venezuela, which is a huge source of their oil. And then the other thing here I wanted to show you was down here in Argentina on slide 44, to show you a little bit about how this works. I borrow this from I teach a class in international law, so I borrow this from my international law class. If you go all the way down to slide 44, you'll see a map of Tierra del Fuego, and slide 45, there's another map there. If you look on the green map on slide 44, there's a little cutaway there, and it's called the Beagle Channel. So above that is the Strait of Magellan, which there's a photograph of that earlier in the packet with the USS Ronald Reagan sailing through it. That is a protected passageway, right? So before there was a Panama Canal, if you had to go through the Drake Passage, it's very, I mean, when it's calm, it's beautiful. When it's not calm, it's dangerous, deadly dangerous. So we're looking for a protected passage. So the Strait of Magellan, named after the Spanish explorer Magellan, whose crew circumnavigated the globe. So another one, the Beagle Channel, is named after Darwin's boat, the HMS Beagle, when he first sailed around South America over to the Galapagos Islands up north near Ecuador. Anyway, so the legal principle for a body of water that borders two nations, so you kind of see the magenta line there. I didn't draw that map. Is the border. To the left is Chile. To the west, we call it. To the east is Argentina. And then the Beagle Channel is when there's a body of water that is the border of two countries. The general rule is, so for example, the United States would be the Rio Grande River, or if you're Mexican, the Rio Bravo River between Texas and Mexico. The center of the river is the border. So half is American, the other half is Mexican. And that's kind of the principle here, right? The problem with that is not the river, the stream itself or the channel, because that pretty much stays relatively stable, though that area is seismic. The problem is the mouth of that. So where do you then draw the border? So if you see on map here this purple line, and then you see a black line that comes out right by the word Beagle Channel. So the river, the channel opens out like this. So then this will be a common theme throughout this class and in your life. It's not what's on the surface that really matters. I mean, don't get me wrong, that matters. We're going to fight a lot about what's below the surface, right? So when it comes to land, we fight about what? Oil, natural gas, water, minerals, gold, uranium, etc., right? In the ocean, you're fighting, of course, not on water space, what's under the ocean, fisheries. So think about, I don't know what you guys' seafood preferences are, but there's a fish called tilapia, huge around Chile. Chilean sea bass, all sorts of fisheries, shrimp, lobster, all that. And then, of course, also under the water are oil and gas, natural gas, fresh water, kelp forests. God knows what's down at the very bottom. And then you also have strategic interests. You know, you don't want navies just sailing their ships right along your coast. So the coastal waters are 12 miles off. I think I've already talked about that in a previous thing. But where do you draw the line? So that's the negotiation. And in Argentina and Chile in the 70s and 80s, both countries are run by what are called military juntas. A junta is a sort of oligarchy, I guess, a military dictatorship that is in those countries was run by the heads of the different. So the Argentinian dictatorship was run by the head of the army, the navy, the air force. I think that was it. And then the army general, whose name escapes me again now, he's the acting president. So it's a military dictatorship, a huge time of oppression, people being disappeared, murdered, all that sort of stuff. Chile is also under the throes of a guy named Augusto Pinochet, also a military dictatorship. They're both kind of right-wing dictators in a way. And dictatorships don't really like each other, right? And they're next to each other, and they don't really, negotiation is not their strong suit. Let's put it that way. So, you know, you don't want a major land war in South America. Yes, it's 9,000 miles away from us, but it would cause massive amounts of loss of blood and treasure and life, more importantly than anything else. So how do we resolve this situation? So the photograph there on the right is the cardinal from the Catholic Church. So remember, the Roman Catholic Church is not just a church. It is also a nation state. It's called the Vatican City or the Holy See. Obviously, that goes back 1,000 years or more in terms of all that. So there's one thing. Yes, they're both dictatorships. Yes, they both speak Spanish. Yes, they're mostly Eurocentric, though there are some indigenous populations. Yes, they both love soccer, but the other thing they have in common is they're literally 98% Catholic. So I don't know the devotion of the leaders of those two countries at that time. I have my suspicions. But what they can't do is ignore the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church sort of can access the people directly, right? So the Pope, basically, his emissary here, the Cardinal, is a experienced diplomat, right? So don't think preacher, religious. I mean, he's a religious figure, of course, but he's also a diplomat, well versed in international politics, international law, and of course, he's from South America, so he's well versed in South American politics, and he knows these people, he knows the culture, right? So he basically sits them down and says, "Look, you don't want a war, we don't want a war, nobody wants a war," and so they hammer out this treaty called the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, right? If it says it in the title, then you know it's true. There is peace and friendship. To be honest, though, that was back in 1984, and we're 41 years hence. There's not really been any saber rattling in that area. They both seem to abide by the treaty. They have since both turned back to sort of democracy in various ways. They've eschewed their military dictatorships, both in the 1980s. Pinochet retired and left, and the Argentinian government sort of collapsed, and not in any sort of bloody revolution, but returned to democracy. Argentina at one time was the wealthiest nation in the world, pre-World War I, especially. Huge beef exports and all that sort of thing. So then the map on slide 45 shows you what that looks like. If you look at that map, you'll see there's to the left of it, there's a index or a key of colored lines that shows you what the border line is. So that red line is, so when you're going out, you have to draw what's called a baseline. So like where, the maps don't do the coastline justice, right? There's things that jut out. When we get to some other maps around the world, especially at the end of the semester, we'll talk a little bit about the law of the sea, and what do you do with bays and gulfs and inlets and those kinds of things. So anyway, that gives you the idea there of where the new borders are. So these things, all lines on these maps that we're looking at in a political geography class, are products of negotiation and products of law, right? These nations over the years have negotiated these lines with each other. Now, they may be a result of war, they may be a result of invasion. Sometimes, of course, they're just a product of geography, like the Rio Grande River is a perfect border between the two countries. But even that wasn't always the border, right? So these things are negotiated and taken and retaken and all of that sort of stuff. Anyway, so that's why those two slides are in there. It's interesting to me because the sort of Catholic Church coming as an outside, that's called mediation in international law. When you have a third party come in and so similar to a mediation in American law, when you have like a divorce, and the soon-to-be ex-husband and wife can't agree, you bring in a mediator, psychologist, or whatever to negotiate who gets the puppy and who gets the kids and who gets the ice trays and the record collection and all that kind of stuff. That's basically what the Catholic Church did in this case, in that way. But again, there's real things at stake. It's not just two countries sort of getting in a stare down with each other for just the sake of a stare down. There are some sort of real issues in terms of border security, economic issues, in terms of fisheries and mineral rights and water rights and all sorts of things like that that are there. And then since I'm here on this map, if you look, that's the Drake Passage. There's a previous map up there, that right here. If you can watch the video I posted, if you want an example of what it might have been like back in the day, there's a really good movie from about 20, I think, oh my gosh, is it 24 years ago now? Holy smokes. It's got Russell Crowe in it, Gladiator, the original Gladiator. And it's called Master and Commander: The Far Side of the World, and it's based on a series of novels. Anyway, the opening scene of that movie, or close to that movie, it's set in the Napoleonic Wars. So they're on a three-masted frigate, old wooden ship, three-masted sailing ship, and they're rounding the Drake Passage, rounding the Cape to get from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And they've got to do that. There's no other really way to do it. But this little ship and these ginormous stormy surge waves it would be terrifying. So that's why they're looking for the Drake Passage, or excuse me, the Strait of Magellan, and then later on why they build the Panama Canal, not just the distance, but the dangerousness of getting around that aspect. And of course, there's no land on the 60 there, that line of the 60, so that means the wind has nothing to really stop it from blowing, and therefore the waves just eventually build up over time whenever there's a storm surge or whatever on there. Anyway, so there's that. Another real thing, the picture of the battleship in Uruguay, at the last picture there, slide 51. The reason that's there is I'm sort of it's dad history, right? World War II. That's the only battle that took place. The only World War II action in South America is called a thing called the Battle of the River Plate, which the mouth of the River Plate is one of the probably the best deep harbor in South America near Montevideo, Uruguay. And the German battleship is patrolling the Atlantic Ocean, and the British send a squadron of ships to find it. It's called the Graf Spee. It is cornered, and then it sails into Montevideo, and then the British surround it, basically block it in there, and then the German captain scuttles the ship. So that's with the picture there. He scuttles it in the shallow part, so he doesn't brick the harbor for the Uruguayans, but he destroys the ship so the Germans can't get it. Anyway, so if you're curious in that, just go to Google and type in Battle of the River Plate or World War II, and you can get a more of a full story on that. I've already gone way longer than I wanted to, just because if any of you are even watching at this point. Anyway, so next week, there's no assignment this week because next week you'll have the exam 1, and that'll be basically all you have next week. I'll post another video on that. So anyway, if you've made it this far, don't worry about that. I'll post more. Thank you very much, and y'all have a good week.